Is there one choice from your past you wish you could undo? For me, that choice wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a choice of profound love and duty that shattered my entire future. Back then, I was only 20, and Michael was the whole world. Our love wasn't a sudden spark. It was that beautiful, slow-burning fire that feels completely invincible. We had everything planned: the white picket fence, the silly names for our future children, and the small, worn silver locket he gave me, promising forever. We were young, foolish, and deeply in love, the kind of love that laughs at obstacles. We were engaged, planning a fall wedding, and I truly believed that nothing, absolutely nothing, could ever pull us apart. I was happy in a way that felt utterly complete, utterly permanent. But life has a cruel way of reminding you that even the strongest fire can be put out by a sudden, cold rain. Our engagement bliss didn't last long. Life hit us with a sudden, terrible blow. My mother fell seriously ill. It wasn't a short illness. The doctors made it clear she would need round-the-clock care for years, maybe forever. Suddenly, all those wedding plans, the future home, and the dreams we had were covered in a heavy, cold shadow. I was the only child, and there was no way I could leave her. Michael, being the beautiful soul he was, swore he would stay, saying we could handle it together. But he had just been accepted into his dream engineering program hundreds of miles away, the one he had worked his whole life for. I looked at my mother, who needed me, and I looked at Michael, whose future I couldn't bear to steal. The terrible choice was clear. I had to let him go, not because I stopped loving him, but because I loved him too much to let my duty become his life sentence. I knew breaking his heart now was the only way to save his future. Saying goodbye was the hardest performance of my life. Michael insisted, "We can make it work. We can wait. I'll take a year off school." But I knew I couldn't let him do that. I knew that waiting for me would slowly kill his future and eventually kill our love. So I did the only thing I could. I became cruel. I told him our love was just a childish thing, that I was overwhelmed by the thought of marriage, and that I simply didn't love him enough to drag him down with my problems. I pushed him away fiercely, using harsh, simple words that cut right to the bone, making sure he was angry enough to leave and never look back. I had to let him believe I was selfish and shallow so he wouldn't turn around. Watching him walk out the door, confused and heartbroken, felt like taking a knife to my own soul. But I knew that if he thought I was the villain, he would eventually move on and live the life he deserved. The moment the door closed behind Michael, the cruel mask dropped and I collapsed. I had pushed him away, but every harsh word I spoke was a lie. The pain was so intense. I felt like I might break entirely. I knew I couldn't tell him the truth out loud, but I desperately needed him to know my real heart, the part that was shuddering for him. So I grabbed the oldest stationery I owned and wrote. I poured out everything: the doctor's diagnosis, the reality of my mother's illness, the agony of sacrificing my own happiness to ensure his success. I wrote that I still loved him, that I always would, and that my breakup was the deepest act of love I knew. When I finished, tears blurring the ink, I sealed the envelope with shaky hands. It was addressed to him, ready to go. But then fear took over. If he read it, he might rush back, throwing away his future for a lost cause. So I took the letter, still sealed, and tucked it into the middle of the only thing I kept from our engagement: a faded photograph of us laughing on the beach. I hid it deep inside my memory box, silencing my voice forever, knowing the truth would stay locked away. The breakup was done, the letter was hidden, and the silence began. The house felt huge, heavy, and empty, even though my mother was there. Every ounce of my energy went into caring for her, managing the household, and making sure she was comfortable. But every small task, making tea, folding laundry, was done with a raw, aching hollow in my chest. I had given up more than just a fiancé. I had given up my college plans, my hope of a career, and my chance to travel and discover the world. The pain wasn't dramatic. It was a slow, quiet erosion of my dreams. I remember sitting by the window, watching the rain, knowing Michael was starting his brilliant new life hundreds of miles away, and knowing that I had willingly chosen this small, difficult room for myself. There were days I almost pulled the letter out, ready to break my promise and call him, but the fear of ruining his future always won. I learned quickly that the deepest kind of heartbreak is the one you have to hide, the one you can never share with a soul. The years blurred together, marked only by the slow passing of the seasons and the unwavering duty to my mother. My youth slipped away while I cared for her, and while I never regretted my choice, the silence became a heavy cloak. I dated sometimes, trying to be normal, but no one ever measured up to the memory of Michael. I realized I was holding everyone at arm's length, afraid to get close because a part of me was still dedicated to the past, to the life I threw away for the best reasons. One avoided old friends and wedding announcements, afraid to hear news of Michael, afraid he would be unhappy, or worse, afraid he would be perfectly happy without me. I became comfortable in my quiet, tucked away life. Yet every time I walked past that dusty memory box in the attic, I felt a sharp, familiar tug of regret, knowing the full truth of my heart was sealed inside that unsent letter. 40 years had passed, and the quiet rhythm of my duty-bound life was finally slowing down. After all those years, my mother had passed peacefully, and though the grief was deep, there was a strange, sudden silence in the house. I was finally free, but free to do what? I began the huge, daunting task of clearing out the attic, a place full of dust and ghosts. Tucked behind some heavy winter blankets was the old memory box, the one I had avoided for decades. As I lifted the lid, I saw a faded photograph right on top. Michael and me laughing on the beach. The day he gave me the locket, my heart gave a painful little jump. I almost closed the lid, afraid of the regret, but something made me stop. I picked up the picture, and there, still sealed in that thin, brittle envelope, was the letter I never mailed. 40 years ago, I made a mistake. Seeing my own handwriting from a lifetime ago, knowing the complete truth was just a sheet of paper away, brought back the crushing pain of my 20-year-old self. The question wasn't just what if I had sent it. The question was, why did fate want me to find it now? I sat down right there in the dusty attic, pulled out the brittle letter, and carefully broke the seal. The moment I started reading my own 20-year-old handwriting, it wasn't just words on a page. It was a voice screaming across 40 years. All the raw, crushing pain of that sacrifice flooded back. I read how I had lied to him, how my heart was breaking, and how the only reason I let him go was to save his dream. The tears fell hot and fast, not just for the lost love, but for the lonely, dutiful life I had chosen in its place. The agony wasn't just in the truth I hid. It was the realization of the time lost, the what if that had defined my entire adult life. Seeing the love poured out so honestly, that love he never knew existed, made the regret feel physical. I thought, if only he had known I wasn't cold. If only he had known the truth. The unsent letter became proof that I had always been faithful to him, even when he believed I wasn't. But now, decades later, reading it felt like both a confession and a challenge. I realized I couldn't put the truth away again. That letter, sealed for 40 years, felt like a message from my younger self demanding that I stop hiding. I realized that keeping the truth locked away had been an act of love then, but keeping it silent now was just an act of cowardice. I had to know. I had to know if he was happy. And I had to know if he ever forgave the cruel words I used to push him away. The simple act of searching for him was terrifying. After all this time, what would I say? How do you explain for decades of silence? I tentatively typed his name, Michael E. last name, into the computer. I felt like a teenager again, heart pounding, adrenaline rushing. I found a few mentions and obituary for his father, a professional profile for an engineer. And then I found it, a link to a small, local charity website featuring a recent photo of Michael. He looked older, of course, a little grayer, but his eyes were exactly the same kind and deep. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by an overwhelming, unstoppable need for closure. I knew I had to tell him about the letter, no matter the outcome. I finally found his phone number through the charity's site and spent an hour rehearsing what I would say. My heart was a drum against my ribs when he answered. His voice was older, but that kind, steady tone was exactly the same. We agreed to meet for a simple coffee, both of us nervously avoiding the past. When I saw him, 40 years melted away, and he looked at me with that same warmth. I handed him the sealed letter right away, telling him, "This is the truth of why I left you." He read it slowly, his eyes filling with tears for the first time. But then, he looked up and smiled a heartbreakingly gentle smile. He told me that when I had left him so harshly, he was destroyed. He went to engineering school, but he couldn't shake the confusion and pain. He spent years focusing on work, but found no joy. Then, about 20 years ago, he realized his true calling wasn't in engineering at all. He started working for that local charity, helping children who had been separated from their families. He explained that my brutal words had actually freed him to follow a path of service and profound fulfillment, a path he wouldn't have found if we had stayed together. He said, "You breaking my heart led me to the life I was truly meant to live." The coffee shop conversation lasted for hours, a quiet, deep unpacking of 40 years of unspoken emotion. After he finished reading the letter, Michael didn't offer to rekindle the romance. Instead, he offered something far more valuable: complete understanding. He explained that my brutal breakup words, which I had regretted every day, had been exactly what he needed to stop looking back and truly find his direction. He thanked me. He thanked me for breaking his heart, telling me he had often wondered what his life would have been like if he had stayed. And now he knew he wouldn't trade his current life of purpose for anything. We spoke about my mother, my quiet years of sacrifice, and the heavy weight of duty. I realized that my most painful, lonely choice had not been a mistake at all, but a crucial piece of a bigger, more complicated design. We parted ways that day not as lovers, but as two souls who had finally closed a circle, achieving a profound, gentle peace that healed the regret on both sides. I walked away from that coffee meeting with Michael feeling lighter than I had in 40 years. The decades of regret, the crushing weight of the what if, were finally gone. I learned that day that my painful sacrifice had been beautiful, and it had actually worked. It hadn't just saved his career. It had led him to his true, fulfilling purpose. The triumph wasn't about getting him back. It was about realizing that I had the strength to choose duty over desire, and that integrity doesn't expire. I was finally free to stop mourning the life I gave up and start living the beautiful, honest life I had earned. I kept the old photo, but I burned the letter, not out of regret, but because the truth was finally spoken and understood. My heart, once shattered by love and sacrifice, was now whole, filled with the quiet, lasting joy of knowing that my toughest choice was ultimately the right one.